press the bell icon on the YouTube app and never miss another update.
Hello everyone. Today let us discuss about diversity in living organism, that is chapter 7. So before going to start this chapter, just imagine the varieties of organisms which are present surrounding you, right? In your surrounding you see different type of organisms, like you see dogs, cats, insects, okay? Some insects will fly and some will be on the ground, some will be grounded, and you will find different varieties of plants, the flowering plants. So in that flower different colors, right? And trees, some are very tall, some are short, the shrubs, the trees, right? You may notice there are so many different type of varieties in the surrounding, just in your surrounding, okay? Imagine you are going to visit a park, okay? You are going to visit a park. So when you go to park, you see there are grasses, okay? There will be grasses, the green grasses will be there, and some people will be sitting, running, right? They are just relaxing with their pets, the pets like dogs, cats, right? And the insects which will be flying, and some are in the grasses, like small insects to the large insects that you can see through your naked eyes, right? So there are different varieties in the park itself, okay? If you notice in the park itself, so there are so many varieties of organisms. Then what about the forest? So if you take an example of forest, in the forest again there are varieties of organisms, right? So you will find the wild animals, some are herbivorous, some are carnivorous, right? And there are some trees which are very tall, to the short plants, the climbers, creepers, right? So there are so many varieties in the forest. So if you compare the forest with the urban area like the park, here you see the more diversity in the forest. In the forest the diversity will be more, right? So what do you think? So what is the diversity then? Why these organisms are so much different from one another? Can't they be same? So let us discuss that in this chapter, that is the diversity in living organisms. So here think that, so can you notice there are so many different varieties on our planet, right? In our planet there are so many varieties of organisms. Some you may know and some you don't know. Some are mysterious, some are dangerous, right? Some you know, you will find them very cute, right? So there are varieties of organisms. And what is ecosystem then? So these varieties of organisms, they have some geographical area, okay? For example, forest. Take forest. So in the forest it is a geographical area. There are different varieties of organisms, right? So that is called an ecosystem, right? Here it is a group of living organisms that live in and interact with each other in a specific environment, okay? So ecosystem, it is a group of living organisms that live in and interact with each other in a specific environment. Iga forest anta tagondre, there are different varieties of organisms which live in, okay, alle iratve, and they will interact with one another, right? For the source of food or else for some other purpose, they will interact with one another, and in that ecosystem only, in that boundary only, right? In that geographical area, that is called as ecosystem, right? So this ecosystem is important so that the organisms may have diversity. That means this ecosystem is responsible for keeping all the organisms, all the different types of organisms in its boundary, okay? Now what is diversity then, right? So here diversity, the presence of different organisms in the same ecosystem or geographical location. So what is this? The presence of different organisms. Here different organisms means the variety of organisms that are present in the ecosystem. Okay, that are present in the ecosystem or a geographical location. Got that? Then now I think you got the clear picture of ecosystem and diversity. Take forest as an example for this. Okay, so in the forest there are different varieties of organisms, and they will be present in a geographical area, that is forest, right? Okay, then the diversity gives the chance for more balanced ecosystem. So what is this? The chance for more balanced ecosystem. What do you mean by more balanced ecosystem? So here what happens, just think that there is a grass in a particular location. ಒಂದು ಲೊಕೇಶನ್ ಇದೆ ಅಂದ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ, ಅಲ್ಲಿ grasses will be present. Okay, and these grasses they will be the food source for the grasshoppers. Okay, grasshoppers ide, they will feed on the grasses, right? And if there is more number of grasshoppers, then they will feed the grass entirely. So illi the eradication of grasses may take place, or else think there is only grass in that area, there are no grasshoppers. Then what happens? The density of the grass may increase, the population, the mass of the grass may increase, right? So for that sake the grasshoppers will be present, they will feed on the grass. And now coming to the grasshoppers particularly, grasshoppers ide anಕೊಳ್ಳಿ, and ಈ grasshoppers ಏನು ಮಾಡುತ್ತೆ, they will feed on the grass. Now the population of the grasshoppers may increase, ತುಂಬ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಆಗ್ಬೋದು. ಅದು ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಆದ ಹಾಗೇನೆ they will feed more on the grass, so the grass will eradicate, right? Then for that sake ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬ್ಯಾಲೆನ್ಸ್ ಆಗಬೇಕು, ಗ್ರಾಸ್ ಮತ್ತು ಗ್ರಾಸ್ ಹಾಪರ್ ಎರಡು ಬ್ಯಾಲೆನ್ಸ್ ಆಗಬೇಕು. For that sake the frog will be present in that location, and these frogs will feed on the grasshoppers, right? Usually the frogs will feed on insects. For the frogs will feed on grasshoppers. Okay, so here what happens, the frogs will feed on grasshoppers and grasshoppers will feed on grass, right? So coming to the frog ತಗೊಳ್ಳಿ, ಈಗ frog, grasshopper, if it is feeding the grasshopper, then the grasshopper population may decrease and the population of the frogs may increase. For that sake the snakes will be present in that area, and these snakes will feed on frog, right? Are you getting this? The grass, grasshoppers, the frog and the snake. So these all different type of organisms, they will balance the ecosystem. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಪಾಪ್ಯುಲೇಷನ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಬ್ಯಾಲೆನ್ಸ್ ಆಗಬೇಕು, ನಥಿಂಗ್ ಶುಡ್ ಬಿ ಹೈ ಆರ್ ನಥಿಂಗ್ ಶುಡ್ ಬಿ ಲೋ, ಜಾಸ್ತಿನೂ ಇರಬಾರ್ದು ಕಮ್ಮಿನೂ ಇರಬಾರ್ದು. ಸೊ ಇಟ್ ಮಸ್ಟ್ ಬಿ ಬ್ಯಾಲೆನ್ಸ್ ಫಾರ್ ಆ್ಯನ್ ಹೆಲ್ತಿ ಎಕೋಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್, ರೈಟ್? ಫಾರ್ ಅ ಹೆಲ್ತಿ ಎಕೋಸಿಸ್ಟಮ್. So here balancing of the organisms, different varieties of organisms population is important. So here diversity gives the chance for more balanced ecosystem. Okay, now what is biodiversity? Diversity is okay, it is the variety. What is biodiversity? So biodiversity means the diversity of life forms. So the variety of life forms. So it is the word completely used to refer to the variety of life forms in a particular region. Okay, so in the particular regionally, so there are varieties of organisms that can be called as biodiversity. Now rough estimations state that there are about 10 million species on our planet, right? 10 million species. And the warm and humid region on the earth between the Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn, can you see the Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn, there is rich in diversity of plants and animal life. ಸೊ ಇಟ್ ಈಸ್ ದ ವಾರ್ಮ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಹ್ಯೂಮಿಡ್ ರೀಜನ್. ಈ ಟ್ರಾಪಿಕ್ ಆಫ್ ಕ್ಯಾನ್ಸರ್ ಮತ್ತು ಟ್ರಾಪಿಕ್ ಆಫ್ ಕೇಪ್ರಿಕಾನ್ ಮಧ್ಯ ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಹ್ಯೂಮಿಡ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ವಾರ್ಮ್ ರೀಜನ್ಸ್ ಇರುತ್ತೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ the plant and animal diversity will be more, and this is called as mega diversity. Okay, so coming to the next, that is, can you see in the group of friends, nimdu ಒಂದು group of friends ಇದೆ ಅನ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ. Okay, you have a group of friends. Are you exactly identical to your friend? Okay, you see there are group of children over here. Are they exactly identical? ನೋಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಸೇಮ್ ಹಾಗೇ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ? ನೋ, ದೇ ಆರ್ ಸಿಮಿಲರ್. ದ ಬಾಡಿ ಡಿಸೈನ್ ಆಫ್ ದೆಮ್ ಆರ್ ಸಿಮಿಲರ್. ದ ಹ್ಯಾಂಡ್ಸ್, ಲೆಗ್ಸ್, ಐಸ್, ನೋಸ್, everything is present on the same place, right? So everyone is common with that character. So it is the body design and they are similar, not exactly identical. Now compare you and your friends group with the monkey, right? So there are some similarities. There are some similarities in the design like hands, legs, the face, right? Somewhat similar. Not much, but you have some similarities with the monkey. But compare with the cow. Now compare you and your friends with the cow. So can you find the similarities? Not much, very less similarities. So here itself is the biodiversity. Each individuals are different from one another. They have unique characters, they have unique designs. Each individual species have unique designs, right? So this itself is the biodiversity. Now think there are different type of living organisms in our planet. Okay, so comparing the microorganisms, right? There are very microorganisms which are very small, like micrometers. The length is about micrometers. There are microorganisms which are very small to the organisms like blue whale and the redwood trees of California. Okay, the blue whale and redwood trees of California. Here blue whale will range about 30 meters length, whereas the redwood trees, they will range about the 100 meters to the length. So can you compare this? Can you compare the microorganisms with this? So can you compare the size? Can you make out like they are very small to the very large, very big organisms, right? Here the size will different. As the organisms differ, the size and the design will also differ. So that is one case of size. Then coming to the lifespan, for example, pine tree, they will live for 1000 years, approximately around 1000 years, whereas there are some insects that live for a few days, for example mosquito. So can you see the difference in lifespan? Here pine trees for 100 years, whereas the mosquito only for few days, right? So can you see the difference? So each organisms have their own lifespan. Each organism species, the species have their own lifespan, right? Then coming to the body appearance, okay, there are some organisms like leptocephalus. They are very transparent. They don't have any color or else pigmentation in their body. So this is one type of organisms. And there are organisms which are very colorful like flowers. You see different colors in a flower. There will be different colors, petals, right? And you see butterfly. You will notice the butterfly. Won't you feel happy after seeing butterfly? Because they have very variant color, they have very variant design and also the colors, right? And also birds have different feathers, and in that feathers there will be different colors, right? So one side there are the colorful organisms, whereas on the other side there are colorless organisms. That is, there is no color in that organisms, where you find these organisms most beautiful, right? So can you see the difference based on size, based on lifespan, and based on the body appearance, right? So this is the variety, okay, this is the variety of organisms. Now these are the varieties and each individuals have different unique characters. ಒಂದೊಂದು ಇಂಡಿವಿಜುವಲ್ಗೆ ಒಂದೊಂದು ಯೂನಿಕ್ ಕ್ಯಾರೆಕ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ಇರುತ್ತೆ, ರೈಟ್? ಸೊ ನಾವು ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂದರೆ ಈ ಎಲ್ಲ ಆರ್ಗ್ಯಾನಿಸಮ್ಸ್ ಏನು ಡಿಫ್ರೆಂಟ್ ಟೈಪ್ ಆಫ್ ಆರ್ಗ್ಯಾನಿಸಮ್ಸ್ ವಿಚ್ ಆರ್ ಪ್ರೆಸೆಂಟ್, ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ವಿ ಸ್ಟಡಿ ದಮ್ ಇಂಡಿವಿಜುವಲಿ ಲೈಕ್ one species. For example, blue whale. Can you read all the characters? Can you study all the characters of blue whale? And then can you shift to study about mosquito? ಈ ಥರ ಒಂದೊಂದೇ ಸ್ಪೀಷೀಸ್ದು ಕ್ಯಾರೆಕ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ಓದ್ತಾ ಹೋಗೋಕ್ಕಾಗತ್ತಾ? Because on our planet, as I said before, there are 10 million species, right? So can you study all the characters of 10 million species in your lifespan? No, right? For that sake, there is a grouping of organisms, okay? These organisms, the different type of organisms can be grouped. So ಒಂದೊಂದು group ಆಗಿ ಮಾಡಿ later we can study them. Later we can study the similarities and dissimilarities, the differences of that group, right? So here then we must study the basis of classification. So what is classification? So classification, it is the method of arranging organisms into groups or sets on the basis of differences and similarities. Okay, ನಾನು ಆವಾಗಲೇ ಹೇಳಿದೆ ಗ್ರೂಪ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಆರ್ಗ್ಯಾನಿಸಮ್ಸ್ ಟು ಸ್ಟಡಿ ದೆಮ್, ರೈಟ್? ಟು ಸ್ಟಡಿ ದ ಆರ್ಗ್ಯಾನಿಸಮ್ಸ್ ಇನ್ ದ ಗ್ರೂಪ್. ಸೊ ಇಟ್ ವಿಲ್ ಬಿ ಈಸಿಯರ್ ದ್ಯಾನ್ ಟು ಸ್ಟಡಿ ಈಚ್ ಇಂಡಿವಿಜುವಲ್ ಸಪ್ರೇಟ್ಲಿ. For that sake, we must group the organisms, we must classify the organisms. So here what is classification? It is the method of arranging organisms into groups or sets on the basis of similarities and differences. So ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಸಿಮಿಲಾರಿಟೀಸು ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾಗತ್ತೆ, ಡಿಫ್ರೆನ್ಸಸ್ಸು ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾಗುತ್ತೆ, ಡಿಫ್ರೆನ್ಸಸ್ಸು ನೋಡಬೇಕಾಗತ್ತೆ. ಓಕೆ, ಸೊ ಬೇಸ್ಡ್ ಆನ್ ದ್ಯಾಟ್ ವಿ ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಕ್ಲಾಸಿಫೈ ದ ಆರ್ಗ್ಯಾನಿಸಮ್ಸ್. ಓಕೆ, ಸೊ ಇದೇ ಥರ ಅರಿಸ್ಟಾಟಲ್, ದ ಗ್ರೀಕ್ philosopher, he classified the animals. He classified the animals according to the habitat. Andre the organism habitat mele he classified. So on land, some organisms will live on land, in water or in air. So the animals which live on land are called as terrestrial animals. The animals which live in water are called as aquatic, whereas the organisms which live in air, okay, which are in the air are called as aerial animals. So ಇದೇ ಥರ habitat ಮೇಲೆ can we classify the organisms, right? So what happens if we take the aquatic animals, okay, we can't study the aquatic animals throughoutly. So ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, there are corals, whales, octopus, shark and starfish, right? So these are different type of organisms which are present in the aquatic medium, right? The corals, octopus, the sharks, they are very different from one another. There is no similarities, there are very less similarities and more differences. Each one is different, very much different from one another. So here we can't group them in a particular group, okay, we can't group them and we can't study their characters, because here what happens, there is a difference obviously. How can we study that, right? So here aquatic animals, there are different types. Now if we consider the terrestrial animals, the animals which live on land, there are insects, snakes and some large animals like elephant. Can you see the difference? Insects are very small, whereas snakes, elephant, so there are very much difference in the terrestrial animals. We can't group them. Now in aerial animals like insects, birds, they are also very much different. So here based on the habitat, can we classify the organisms? So it was the question and it was the major drawback of Aristotle. Here habitat is the only point they share in common, so that it was the drawback of his classification. Okay, so bari habitat onde hidkondu we can't classify the organisms, right? Next, what are characters then? So I said there are different types, different similarities and differences. Similarities and differences are the basis of character or basis of classification. Then what are similarities and what are differences? Here these are the characters. Okay, then what is character? Character is a distinguishing quality or trait of an individual. ಒಂದು ಇಂಡಿವಿಜುವಲ್ ಇದೆ ಅಂದರೆ they have some qualities, they have some features, right? So that are the characters. For example, appearance and behavior. So if you notice an organism, you will see the appearance and you will see the behavior. Their body design will be different, right? So these are the characters. Say for example, we have 5 digits. Okay, we have 5 digits. So this is one character. We can run, we can walk, or we move, but the trees can't. The banyan tree can't move. So this is also a one character. For classification, there must be a way to classify, to group the organisms. So what is that way? That way is the characteristics, right? That way is the characteristics. Through characters, okay, through noticing or else through identifying the characters, we can group the organisms, right? Then can we identify all the characters? ಈಗ ಕ್ಯಾರೆಕ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ಇದೆ ಅಂದರೆ ಎಲ್ಲ ಕ್ಯಾರೆಕ್ಟರ್ಸ್ನು ಕನ್ಸಿಡರ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಕ್ಲಾಸಿಫೈ ಮಾಡೋಕ್ಕಾಗತ್ತಾ? ನೋ. ದೇರ್ ಆರ್ ಸಮ್ ಫಂಡಮೆಂಟಲ್ ಕ್ಯಾರೆಕ್ಟರ್ಸ್. ಸೊ ವಿ ಮಸ್ಟ್ ನೋಟಿಸ್ ದ ಫಂಡಮೆಂಟಲ್ ಕ್ಯಾರೆಕ್ಟರ್ಸ್. ಸೊ ವಾಟ್ ಆರ್ ದಿಸ್ ಫಂಡಮೆಂಟಲ್ ಕ್ಯಾರೆಕ್ಟರ್ಸ್? ಲೆಟ್ ಅಸ್ ಟೇಕ್ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್. ಸೊ ಸ್ಟೋನ್ ಪಿಲ್ಲರ್ಸ್ ಅಂದ್ಕೊಳ್ಳಿ. ಸೊ ಯು ಆರ್ ಗೋಯಿಂಗ್ ಟು ಬಿಲ್ಡ್ ಅ ಸ್ಟೋನ್ ಪಿಲ್ಲರ್. ಸೊ ದೇರ್ ಆರ್ 3 ಪಿಲ್ಲರ್ಸ್. ಸೊ ನೀವೀಗ 3 ಪಿಲ್ಲರ್ಸ್ನ ಕಟ್ಟಬೇಕು. ಯು ವಾಂಟ್ ಟು ಬಿಲ್ಡ್ ದ ಪಿಲ್ಲರ್. ಸೊ ಯು ವಿಲ್ ಫೈಂಡ್ ದ ಸ್ಟೋನ್ಸ್. ಫಾರ್ ದ್ಯಾಟ್ ಯು ಗಾಟ್ 3 ಸಿಮಿಲರ್ ಸ್ಟೋನ್ಸ್. ಸೊ 3 ಸಿಮಿಲರ್ ಸ್ಟೋನ್ಸು ಸಿಕ್ಕಿರುತ್ತೆ. ಯು ವಿಲ್ ಪ್ಲೇಸ್ ದಮ್, ಓಕೆ, ಇನ್ ದ ಬೇಸ್. Okay, for the foundation you will place the 3 stones which are similar. By chance you got the similar stones. Now you got other stones. ಮತ್ತೆ stones collect ಮಾಡ್ತೀರಾ. So you will place on them. Okay, ಈ stones ಮೇಲೆ ಮತ್ತೆ place ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಹೋಗ್ತೀರಾ. So now you will place some different stones because you got some different shapes, right? So now you will place based on the first stone. ಅಂದರೆ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಯಾವ ಸ್ಟೋನ್, ಬೇಸಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾವ ಸ್ಟೋನ್ ಇರುತ್ತೆ ಅದ್ರ ಮೇಲೆ ನೀವು ಪ್ಲೇಸ್ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾಗತ್ತೆ. ಸೊ ದಿಸ್ ಸ್ಟೋನ್, ದ ಸೆಕೆಂಡ್ ಸ್ಟೋನ್ ಮಸ್ಟ್ ಬಿ ಬೇಸ್ಡ್ ಆನ್ ದ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಸ್ಟೋನ್, ದ ಶೇಪ್ ಆಫ್ ದ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಸ್ಟೋನ್. ಓಕೆ, ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ದೆನ್ ಯು ವಿಲ್ ಪ್ಲೇಸ್ ದ ಥರ್ಡ್ ಸ್ಟೋನ್, ರೈಟ್? ಅಗೇನ್ the third stone shape will be based on the shape of the second stone, right? The shape of the second stone. Can you notice that? To build a pillar, you need to study the shape of the stones. You need to notice the shape of the stones. So basic stones, the base stones which are present, they are important to decide the shape of the further stones, right? ಸೊ ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಫಿಟ್ ಆಗೋವಂಥ ಸ್ಟೋನ್ ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಇಡ್ತೀರಾ. ಸೊ ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಫಿಟ್ ಆಗೋವಂಥ ಸ್ಟೋನ್ ನೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಇಡ್ತಾ ಹೋಗ್ತೀರಾ. ಸೊ ಹಿಯರ್ ದ ಸ್ಟೋನ್ಸ್ ವಿಚ್ ಆರ್ ಅಟ್ ದ ಬೇಸ್ ಆರ್ ದ ಫಂಡಮೆಂಟಲ್ ಕ್ಯಾರೆಕ್ಟರ್ಸ್. ಓಕೆ, ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ದಿಸ್ ಫಂಡಮೆಂಟಲ್ ಕ್ಯಾರೆಕ್ಟರ್ ವಿಲ್ ಡಿಸೈಡ್ ದ ಕ್ಯಾರೆಕ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ಫರ್ದರ್, ರೈಟ್? ಸೊ ದೀಸ್ ಆರ್ ದ ಫಂಡಮೆಂಟಲ್ ಕ್ಯಾರೆಕ್ಟರ್ಸ್. ಫಾರ್ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್, ಸೊ ವೆನ್ ಯು ಟೇಕ್ ರ್ಯಾಟ್ ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಎಲಿಫೆಂಟ್ ಆ್ಯಸ್ ಆನ್ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್. ಸೊ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, the rat and elephant are grouped in a particular group. Andre they can be grouped. So how can you group a rat and elephant in a particular class? Okay, ಒಂದು ಕ್ಲಾಸಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂದರೆ ಒಂದು ಗುಂಪಲ್ಲಿ ಸೊ ರ್ಯಾಟ್ ಮತ್ತು ಎಲಿಫೆಂಟ್ನ ಗ್ರೂಪ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀರಾ. how can you group them? So are they similar? So you may have doubt because the size of the rat is very small compared to the size of the elephant, right? So how can you group them? So here you are saying the characters which are on the top, andre the size is not that much important. So here the fundamental characters are the rat as well as the elephant. They will give birth to the young ones. They are viviparous. they will give birth to the young ones, and they have hairs on their body. They have digestive system for nutrition. They have digestive system which are similar, right? So similar digestive system में रहते, as well as they have teeth to tear, to chew the food. They have teeth, both have the teeth, right? And they will feed the young one, like they will feed the young milk for their young one. They have mammary glands, right? So these are the fundamental characters. So based on the fundamental characters, we can group the organisms. And humans as well as dogs, cat, they all are mammals, because we also give birth to the young ones. We also have hair on our body. We have a digestive system. We have well defined teeth, right? So these all the characters. We also have a mammary gland. So these all are the characters, the fundamental characters which are used to group the organisms, right? So this is the fundamental characters, like the very basic, the fundamental characters will decide whether the organisms are classified in the group, okay? Now coming to the basis of classification. So this was about the fundamental characters, and there are other characters, okay? There are other characters or some other bases, some other criteria to classify an organisms, okay? So one of the criteria is presence or absence of nucleus. So based on the presence or based on the absence of nucleus, that means the nuclear membrane, okay, the outer covering, the nuclear membrane, or else whether the cell contains membrane for its apparatus. So cell have different apparatus like mitochondria, Golgi complex, endoplasmic reticulum. Does this apparatus have the membrane, one thing, and does the nucleus have the membrane, right? So based on that we can classify the organisms. So here what happens, not only the appearance, not only the behavior, the organisms can be classified based on the cellular level. Nowadays technology have facilitated, right? Technology have facilitated to undergo to study the cells, right? To study the cells, to study the structures. There are electron microscope where we can observe the membranes or else the cell apparatus, right? So based on that we can classify the organisms. Based on the cellular level we can classify the organisms like prokaryotic and eukaryotic organisms, right? There are prokaryotic organisms. Here what are the characters of prokaryotic organisms? Here the main thing that differ from prokaryotic and eukaryotic is that the prokaryotic organisms doesn't have the nuclear membrane, okay? The prokaryotic organisms doesn't have nuclear membrane, and some of the apparatus doesn't have the membrane on them. So here what happens in the prokaryotic organism, the pathway to synthesize, okay, the synthesizing pathway, the activities which takes place in the cell through some pathways will differ from prokaryotic to eukaryotic, because in the eukaryotic there is a particular membrane, the nuclear membrane is present, and the cell apparatus like mitochondria, Golgi complex, lysosome, right, vesicles, so all have membranes. So here what happens, the pathway can be taken place in an isolated state. So in the nucleus, inside the nucleus will contain its own function. It will perform its own function. Mitochondria, it will perform its own function. So here the cell activities will be more effective compared to the prokaryotes, because in the prokaryotes there is no boundary for apparatus, right? There is no membrane for apparatus. So here everything must be done in the cytoplasm itself. So here the pathway will differ from prokaryotic to eukaryotic, right? So there are differences. So here each cell have different designs, right? So here designs means in the nucleus, okay, in the nucleus the genetic material which is present, it is the design, right? It is the design of that cell. So this will leads to the further development. This design will leads to the further development, that is by reproduction. So here what happens, the design of the prokaryotic cell will not facilitate, or else it will not facilitate much to reproduce into a multicellular organisms. Okay, so ಈ prokaryotic cell ಏನಿರುತ್ತೆ, so it is the primitive cell, it doesn't have more capacity to produce a multicellular cell, right? So when the evolution will take place, it doesn't have the capacity, but the eukaryotic cell, it is more effective, the activities will be more effective. So ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, the prokaryotic cell further as the time passes, it will develop and it will produce the multicellular, like a group of cells, okay, the multicellular organisms, but the prokaryotics cannot. So that is the difference, and classification can be done based on the cellular level by this difference, like prokaryotes and eukaryotes. The organisms with prokaryotic cell are called as prokaryotes, whereas the eukaryotic organisms are called as eukaryotes. For example, bacteria, and here the kingdom like protista, fungi, animals and plants, they will come under the eukaryotes. Okay, so this was one criteria, and there is one more criteria, that is number of cells in an organism. As I said before, the prokaryotes, okay, the prokaryotes, they cannot further develop, okay, only the prokaryotes, they cannot further develop into multicellular organisms. So here what happens, the eukaryotes which are present, they will further develop, and by evolution, by modifications, they will develop and they will form new organisms which are multicellular. Okay, so again we can classify based on the cells, number of cells, like if the individual is only of one cell, or else if the individual is with many cells, right? So here the bacteria which is prokaryotic, right, it is a prokaryotic, whereas amoeba, paramecium, they are eukaryotic, but they doesn't have the capacity of being multicellular. Okay, so we can group them as unicellular organisms, right? As unicellular organisms, that organisms that have only a single cell, they are called as unicellular organisms, like amoeba, bacteria, paramecium. And there are some organisms, the eukaryotic organisms, which are multicellular, the organism consisting more cells, like plants, animals, right? So likewise, based on the cells, based on the number of cells, we can classify the organisms whether they are unicellular or multicellular. Okay, so next criteria is mode of nutrition. So here what happens, each organisms or else each species have their mode of nutrition. Like compare the plants, what they do, they produce their own food by using inorganic carbon source, okay, inorganic carbon source, water, in the presence of sunlight and chlorophyll, they will prepare their own food by the process called photosynthesis. They will store the food, later they will use the stored food for their energy production, right? So these organisms are called as autotrophs. The autotrophs are the organisms which prepare their own food. They will prepare their own food, but there are some organisms like humans, we depend on other organisms for the source of food, right? We depend on other organisms for the source of food. They are called as heterotrophic organisms. The organisms which depend or else which feed on other organisms are called as heterotrophic organisms. Again, in the heterotrophic organisms, there are different level of nutrition, different mode of nutrition. So here some are saprophytic, that means these organisms, the source of food which is present, this source of food is broken down outside the body, okay, outside the body, and the broken down material which is present, the broken down food which is present, they will consume them. Okay, these organisms are called as saprophytic organisms because they depend on dead and decay organisms. These are saprophytes. Now next are parasitic organisms. The parasitic organisms, they will feed on the simple molecules. These parasitic organisms, they will depend on other organisms. Okay, some are outside the body, some will be present inside the body. They will depend on other organisms where they get the simple food. Okay, the simple food, because these organisms cannot break down the food. The complex food which is present, they can't break down, they doesn't have capacity to break down into simple molecules, so they will feed the simple molecules directly. Okay, and there are some organisms like holozoic, there are some organisms which undergo holozoic nutrition. For example, animals, higher animals, lion, elephant, humans, so every organisms. So here what happens, these organisms, they will take the food source, the complex food source, they will eat the complex food source, and inside the body the complex food source is broken down into the simple food source, the simple molecules. So that is the nutrition. So here these are different type of mode of nutrition. Okay, so can you see the difference? Can you see the different type of taking the food itself, right? Here nutrition means the digestion process. That means nutrition, it is the process where we take the food, okay, all the living organism will consume the food, and this food, the simple food which is present, it is absorbed in the body, and further it is utilized for the production of energy. Okay, then this nutrition are of different types, autotrophic and heterotrophic. In the heterotrophic, again saprophytic, parasitic, holozoic. Coming to the saprophytic, these are the organisms which depend on dead and decayed material, right? They will depend on that material because the food which is present, the source of food which is present, it will break down outside the body, and broken down food, the simple molecules which are present, they will consume that are saprophytes, whereas parasites, they doesn't have the capacity to break down the food inside the body. So for that sake, these parasitic organisms, they will feed on simple molecules, they will directly feed on simple molecules. And there are holozoic mode of nutrition, the organisms which are undergo holozoic nutrition, like they will eat the complex food source, and inside the body the complex food source which is present, it will break down into simple molecules, right? So based on mode of nutrition, we can classify the animals. Here itself you can see there are different groups, like plants, that is one group, some are saprophytes, parasites, and some are higher organisms, holozoid, right? So here based on the nutrition, we can group the organisms. Next, coming to the level of body organization. So what is this level of body organization? So here the organism's body, so if you notice an organism body, so whether these organisms are at cellular level, so if you notice, you will get to know whether they are cellular level or whether they are in the tissue level, organ level, organ system level, like some primitive organisms, some very lower organisms, they are of cellular level of organization, like amoeba, right? They are only of single cells, whereas some tissue level of organization like hydra, right? In the hydra, there are specific group of cells which perform some functions, okay? Tissue level, organ level, and these organs will combine to form organ system. Like in human beings, we have organ system level of organization, right? So different organ system, like different organs will form organ system, and this organ system will perform different functions. Here what happens, as the organisms become more complex, as the multicellular organisms become more complex, they will have specialized organs or else the specialized structures to perform specialized functions. Okay, so here based on the level of organisms, whether the cell is at cellular level of organization, tissue level of organization, organ level of organization, organ system level, so based on that we can classify the organisms. So here the basis of classification can be done, okay, the basis of classification can be done based on either the organism is of prokaryotic or eukaryotic, that is presence or absence of the nucleus, okay, and the next one was based on the cells, number of cells, whether they are unicellular or multicellular, and mode of nutrition, whether the organisms are autotrophic or heterotrophic. Again in the heterotrophic there are different modes, saprophytic, parasitic, holozoic, right? And the level of organization, the body level of organization, whether they are at cellular level, whether they are at tissue level, whether they are at organ system. Likewise, these are some criteria, see, these are some bases for classification. So here these are the characters, okay. So for classification there must be a way, right? ಒಂದು ವೇ ಬೇಕು ಕ್ಲಾಸಿಫೈ ಮಾಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ, ಒಂದು ಬೇಸ್ ಬೇಕು. ಸೊ ಕ್ಯಾರೆಕ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ಆರ್ ದ ಬೇಸಸ್ ಫಾರ್ ದ ಕ್ಲಾಸಿಫಿಕೇಶನ್. Okay, so first initially the characters, the fundamental characters, and some criteria, some basic criteria, like what I said before, the nucleus, the number of cells, the nutrition, and also the level of organization. Based on that we can classify the organisms, right? So this was about the basis of classification. So today we had discussed about the diversity, the biodiversity, how there are different type of organisms, how they differ from one another, right? Based on size, based on lifespan, based on their appearance, right? There are different varieties of organisms, and the basis of classification, that is characters. Again there are some fundamental characters, there are some criteria which are used, some basic criteria which are used for the classification. Okay, in the next class let us discuss about the classification, how the classification is related to the evolution, the relationship between the classification and evolution. Okay, so thank you.